It was a chilly autumn evening when Sarah and Mark decided to take a spontaneous road trip to explore the remote countryside. They had just bought a new SUV and were eager to test it out on the winding, rural roads that led to an old, almost forgotten town nestled in the hills. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the landscape, they found themselves on a deserted stretch of road flanked by dense forests. The GPS showed they were still a good hour away from their destination, but the beauty of the twilight drive kept their spirits high. Mark was at the wheel, while Sarah enjoyed the scenic views from the passenger seat. As they rounded a particularly sharp bend, Sarah noticed a figure standing by the side of the road, thumb extended in the classic hitchhiker pose. It was a young woman, dressed in an old-fashioned white dress that seemed out of place in the modern world. Her long hair flowed in the wind, and she looked cold and desperate. "Did you see that?" Sarah asked, turning to Mark. He nodded, slowing down the car. "We should help her," he said. "It's getting dark, and she might need a ride." They pulled over, and Sarah rolled down her window. "Do you need a lift?" she called out. The woman nodded silently and climbed into the back seat. There was something ethereal about her presence, and Sarah felt a shiver run down her spine as she closed the door. The woman spoke very little, only offering her thanks in a soft, almost whispery voice. As they continued their drive, the atmosphere in the car grew tense. The woman gave them vague directions, leading them further into the wilderness. Sarah and Mark exchanged uneasy glances, but didn't want to abandon their mysterious passenger in the middle of nowhere. After what felt like an eternity, the woman asked them to stop near a small, decrepit house that appeared out of the darkness. "This is my home," she said, her voice barely audible. Mark and Sarah watched as she exited the car and walked slowly toward the house, disappearing into the shadows. They waited for a moment, expecting to see lights flicker on inside, but the house remained dark and silent. Confused and a bit unsettled, they decided to drive away. As they continued their journey, Sarah couldn't shake off the feeling of unease. She turned to check the back seat, expecting to see the woman's belongings, but it was empty. No sign that anyone had ever been there. She gasped and nudged Mark, who glanced back in disbelief. "We should go back," Sarah urged. "Something isn't right." They turned the car around and headed back to the house, but when they arrived, the house was gone. In its place was a small clearing, overgrown with weeds and shrubs. There was no sign of the woman or the house she had claimed as her home. Puzzled and a bit frightened, they drove to the nearest town and recounted their experience to the locals. An elderly man, who had lived in the area all his life, listened intently and then told them a chilling tale. Many years ago, a young woman lived in that house with her family. One night, she went out to meet her lover but never returned. They say she was killed in a hit-and-run accident on the very road you traveled. Since then, people have reported seeing her hitchhiking, trying to find her way home. Sarah and Mark left the town the next morning. Their adventure turned into a haunting memory. They vowed never to pick up hitchhikers again, especially on lonely, winding roads.